Alright, no plans to change my clothes. I don't really care anymore. Though he hadn't thought of such matters up there, wasn't it the awareness at the back of his mind of his nosy shanty in the great western yard, of old Tom's cynical troubles, of Miss Drew's tragic passion, of Garrett's mania about Chalice Well, of Philip's scornful hostility, of the difficulty of propitiating their landlady, of the way Mad Bet was forever waylaying them. Yes, and of the sights and sounds, so many of them disagreeable, that crowded on in his days as he went back and forth between North London Street and the railway station, which, like the solid masonry of the bulk of St. John's Tower, making its rich turrets and pinnacles so much the lovelier, had given the final magic touch to those golden wheat stalks and those black stockings. I don't remember what he's talking about there. Doesn't matter. John dug his root-handled hazel stick viciously into the dry cart ruts as this thought came to him. "My sweet," he cried aloud. "What is it, John? Do you suppose all our happiness depends on contrasts? You mean our having to come down here and me having to go back this for dinner? That kind of thing, yes." "Better walk alone now," she said, drawing her hand away and moving it quickly to her hat and then to her waistband. "I know what you mean, John, and I've thought of that too. But sometimes I get a feeling that there's a world, just inside or just outside this world, where these opposites that are so hard to understand lose their difference altogether." "But that means death, doesn't it?" She turned her head towards him, and he was astonished at the softness, the bloom, the glow that suffused her face at that moment. "Not necessarily, not always," she said slowly. And then, before turning her head away, she smiled one of those deep, mysterious, feminine smiles that only the greatest poets and artists, such as Dante, Leonardo, Blake, had dared to note, depict, and comment on in their troubled search for the absolute. St. John's clock struck 6 as they reached the center of the town. "Too late for tea, John," she said. And then she added, "We'll have our tea at midnight and all to ourselves. But oh, goodness, I do feel so frightened all of a sudden." "What's the matter, sweetheart?" "Oh, I don't know, John. I'm afraid she'll be terribly upset. You won't be angry if I don't come, and you've waited and waited?" "Of course not," he replied hurriedly. "By God, it's only the what I deserve if I have to come back alone. Besides, it's only putting it off till tomorrow." The girl stared in front of her, fixing her eyes on that well-preserved Gothic building that is usually called the Abbot's Tribunal. Something had profoundly disturbed her. Tomorrow, she murmured vaguely. "What is it, my sweet? What is it, Mary?" She gave a quick sigh and a shake of her head. "Oh, nothing. I expect I'm just nervous. But when you've looked forward to a thing for a very long time and it's just..." She bit her lower lip. She pushed back the hair beneath her hat with the unconscious gesture of a woman facing the worst tidily. "Well, my dear," she said resolutely, fighting down a craving to burst into tears and to cry frantically, "let's go to the room now, straight away, quick, to the room, now!" "Well, my dear, I suppose we'd better part here. I'll just have a comfortable time to see you for a moment or two before we dress for dinner." "Will you come over to the room in your dress?" John asked, feeling as if he were a tramp making a rendezvous with a princess. "Of course. I've got my warm cloak, haven't I? It's brings me little black bag. I'll bring my little black bag." John looked at her with astonishment. That she should be able, this delicate, exquisite provocateur of feelings such as could ascend the steps of the ultimate heaven, To manage such a drastic undertaking as to have a scene with Miss Drew and leave the house with a black bag seemed to him wonderful. That she was ready to do it, that she was fond of him enough to do it, amazed him. He had never been a man who attracted women, and he exaggerated their coldness towards him. Indeed, in regards to the love of women, he had a physical humility that was almost a mania. One of the strongest holds that Mary had over him was the simple fact that she, a sweet-looking, intellectual girl, could be in love with him at all. Secretly, John regarded himself as the most unlovable human creature that lived in Glastonbury. As he continued to hold the hand which she had given him and to stare at her like a person in a trance, Mary had herself to make the move she dreaded. "Goodbye, till tonight," she said, and tore her hand away. But she was back again before John had left the spot. It was a crowded piece of pavement where they had stopped in front of the mullioned windows of the old tribunal, and John, following the cream-colored frock with his eyes, had stepped into the gutter so as not to be jostled. Here they met as she pushed her way back against the current of the crowd. "If I don't come tonight, I'll come tomorrow morning. You won't go out till I come, will you?" "I should say not." And she had flown for the second time. She still had that queer, disturbed feeling as, coming down Silver Street, she passed the high vicarage wall. "It looks like a monastery," she thought. She was anything but reassured when she caught sight of Sam Decker at the vicarage gate, talking to Crummy Gurd. Crummy had recently taken to helping old Mrs. Robinson arrange the flowers for the church altar, and she had come, quite naturally, that Saturday night, to fetch a bunch of white geraniums from the vicarage garden. She raised his hat as Mary passed. Sam raised his hat as Mary passed, and Crummy nodded. But the impression left by this encounter was an unpleasant one. "She holds those white flowers like a nun," Mary thought. "And she used to be such a lovely, merry creature. I believe that man is putting horrible ideas into her head. He's got a sort of furtive inquisitor's look. He'll be making that pretty little thing into some terrible order. How she is listening to him, drinking in every word. He's worse than a priest, that young man. And what a shifty, sensual look he's got. He gave me a look as much as to say, 'Go and take your pleasure. Go and break Miss Drew's heart. A time will come when you too will come here for white geraniums.'" As Mary hurriedly slipped off her cream-colored frock, she felt a desire to crumple that dress between her hands and press it to her face instead of folding it up so carefully, and began taking down her hair. She became conscious that her panic just now went deeper than the struggle with poor Miss Drew, and deeper even than the difference between the tribunal and that golden field. She paused in her task, with her bare arms lifted to her feet at the mirror, and stared into her own grey eyes. Mary was as little conceited of her looks, nor, to confess the truth, were they of any startling quality, as her lover cousin, for he could hardly be called a husband yet, with his bridal sheet still cold, was conceited of his. Into her grey eyes she looked, therefore, as a spirit might look that would fain give pleasure to the man she loved by giving him her body. "The next time," she thought, "I look in the glass will be in our own room." She took the comb now and began combing out her hair, holding her head so far back that she made her long tresses hang straight as seaweed, clinging to a smooth oval-shaped stone. And she really did forget her anxious anxiety now, and Miss Drew and everything. For the electricity in her hair, as she pulled the comb through it, gave her such a delicate, amorous shiver that it made her feel as if butterfly wings were caressing her nipples under her short shift. Ooh. Racy. And she thought, what will it be like tonight? Shall I feel awkward and ashamed? Will I be able to sleep? There came a puckered wrinkle to her forehead now as she put the comb down and began plaiting her smoothed-out locks. John was funny. John's manias and fastidiousness, where girls were concerned, seemed to be endless. I'll be a fool, an idiotic fool, if I let him see me undressed too soon. I'd better put out the lights while I'm slipping on my nightgown. Her mind pondered on gravely and intently, thinking to herself, well, there you are again, you curious creature. It was indeed a fierce mania of Mary's to stare into her own eyes at the looking-glass. She did it as a rule, more angrily than with any other feeling. And when she did it, she always thought of the self that looked back at her there as something quite different from the self she was conscious of really being. Her real self didn't seem to have eyes at all, didn't, in some mysterious way, seem to need eyes or nose or mouth. Her real self seemed compounded only of pure ether and totally independent of bodily form. I felt this unsafe feeling somewhere else, she now told her staring gray eyes. And I know where it was, too. It was the night when I undressed after being in the boat with John on the Wysee. The night when I was on the room next to Dave and Persephone, and when John was at that inn. What Mary could not know was that the original cause of this feeling was that the desperate prayer which they had set up from the boat that had done that day had only reached the malice in the first cause instead of its beneficence. She tried angrily now to shake off that feeling. If you'll recall, that was early on in this book. If I do make Miss Drew let me go tonight, she thought, I'll have it out with you, looking so wild and troubled. And then, not thinking of herself as beautiful, she set herself to think of the best method of procedure when the great moment came. No young lady from Wallops, led by young Tusey into my other house, could have meditated more carefully on the diplomacy of provocation. But this grave, true-hearted girl, before she had finished arranging her hair as she wished it to be, had smiled once at her own image. It was a flurried, faint, flickering smile, like a watery sun of vaporous ice. But when she came to kneel before her chest of drawers to take out her best white evening dress, that she had not put on since the night when Tom Barter came, she suddenly felt to laughing aloud. The memory had come into her head of those everlasting Elizabethan bawdy jests about the taking of maidenheads. I don't fancy I'll be much changed in that respect, she thought to herself as she unfolded her big crimson sash. But she had no sooner placed dress and sash side by side upon the bed and had begun to wonder what stockings to select, when there came a faint, hesitating knock on the door. It turned out to be Lily, and Lily with tears running down her cheeks. "What is it? What's the matter?" she cried. "Come in, Lily. Come in, and tell me what it is." She pulled the girl in and closed the door. "There, there," she murmured soothingly. "Don't you cry. You'll spoil your nice, clean apron. Look, here's a new handkerchief, and I'll give it to you, Lily, to keep. It's real Norwich linen." Louis was, I thought Mr. Weatherwax said... Now stop, Lily, there's a good girl. Stop and tell me about it quietly. And what she's got to say quietly? Well, we're going to have to wait till next time, because that's the end of that page, and I'm not going forward. So, until next time, I'll see you on Glastonbury. Stay safe out there, please. Cheers.